Hello everyone and welcome to the Television 2 video. Today we are starting the Strategy Talk series. So this is where I'm going to watch some footage of a game and we're going to talk a little bit about what we see, what both players could do from where they are at a specific situation, how to deal with certain things that happen, why something works, why something doesn't work, things like that. So the plan for now is basically so I've watched multiple times, thought about what I could talk about, and then I'm just going to pick some specific moments and we're going to watch a part of this and then we're going to talk about it and then, we put everything together. However, it's also possible if you guys think that you like this more that in the future I will basically watch the game as usual and comment as usual, but just stop at certain points and talk about this a little bit longer. So not leaving out anything in between. You can let me know in the comment, of course, what you prefer. Now, of course, I have to say that this is aimed at newer players. I don't think that is much that I can teach a good player because I'm not on a better level than these players. But of course, anyone who's a veteran player is very much welcome to stick around, listen to what I have to say, and then correct me in the comments if I say something wrong or if you have an idea how to do things differently. Always remember, guys, that sometimes there is an obviously objectively better or worse answer to or solution to a certain problem. However, there's also a lot of times where it is very much debatable on what you do, and it kind of comes down sometimes to your personal playstyle. And because of that, not everything that I might tell you here is actually something that might work for you. You have to keep that in mind, right? What I tell you is always subjective to my experience and how I play the game. This does not necessarily work the same for you. So you always have to figure out yourself what works for you and what doesn't. And if there are some of the top players that you see in these casts sometimes in the comments, you should 100% listen to them. But yeah, I think with that, let's now get into the video. What I do want to start with is the decks. We don't talk about the decks like in super great detail. I'm not going to go through the specific matchups, relevant choices, but what I want to point out is some certain channel themes that I think are important to cover, because you always have to remember that a badly built deck can lose you the game. And we start with CIL. So, first things first, I do not think that is a good income for this division. I think this is more of a Vanguard or Maverick division. It's not that you cannot build it balanced, but the problem is some of the tabs are rather limited in size or what it's in there. And I think this makes it not such a good choice for longer incomes. You want to aim for shorter games. So, yeah. Now, if we're staying with the income, I do think that one mistake that we see here is, first of all, because of the long game oriented income, we do see an overrepresentation of C phase cards, and also we do see neglect of B phase in the tank tab, right? So what do you want to make sure, and even though your income may drop, you still want to make sure that you have the tools that you might need in every phase available to you. And this includes tanks. So 6 Shermans in A phase might bring you through A and B phase depending on how things go, but it might very well not be enough. So you might want to make sure that you have some Shermans in B phase ready to call in if you need them. And I know it's expensive, I know it's 80 points and you have 90 points per minute, but I think it is well worth, because if you have to call one in and you don't have one, it's more devastating than spending 1 minute of income on a Sherman. Now, what you could also do alternatively is take the Stewards, because the Stewards are cheaper. So this is kind of the middle ground. Because if you need an armored unit to fix something that a Steward can do, then of course getting that Steward for cheaper is much, much better. However, there are situations where you might need a Sherman where a Steward won't do, so you just have to find the balance there for you. You can also take the Steward in A phase, and then probably the Sherman and Stewards combined will last you through A and B phase. I think that's also an option. That really depends on what you're up against and how you play in general. Now, what is also really bad here is these units in Z phase, right? So 2K AT, I mean, in this matchup it's not so much, but in general I would say it's an essential tool, and you want to make sure that you have these as early as possible. Now, you don't need to take everything in A phase if that means that the availability is too low to last you through the game. But B phase, I think, is the very latest point where you want to start taking some of your essential tools. So 2K AT, I think B phase is where you want to have this. You also, I mean, you don't. Yeah, you might need these 6, but if you need them in A or B phase, and you don't have them, things are really not going to get up. And by the time you can get them, maybe things are already screwed up anyway. So just something to keep in mind for you. And then AA, this is even worse than the 17 pounder in my opinion, because this, like, you want to have AA as early as possible. You need AA from A phase onwards. Now some divisions don't have this, and they already suffer from that, like it's noticeable. So, and in this case, I do get the concept of taking them later. I think you can actually take the Crusaders in B, because you don't have that much AA, and of course, you don't want to run out early on. So taking the Crusaders in B is fine, and then just have to somehow survive A phase. But if you want to survive A and B phase without AA, this is going to be super difficult. Now I know that he has 20 mils in A, but I don't really count this. This is a bad AA piece. So yeah, from B phase on, you want to have Crusaders. Otherwise, you're going to get air spam. And then the last thing that I do want to mention is the Piats. So in the Recon lab, he has the Esploratori, and he really should take them. Why? Well, because this is basically the bazooka unit. Right. And so there are divisions where you don't need this, like irregular Commonwealth infantry tabs have tons of Piats, right? So there's no reason to bring a specific dedicated Piat unit on top of that. However, in this tab you don't. The Commandosi have them, but this is this is a line infantry unit that you want to use regularly, and it might not be where you need the Piat. Also, it's kind of expensive, so if you need a Piat, you don't want to be calling this in. Same for this leader, it also has a Piat, but it comes in C phase only, so you have to get like last till then, and then in addition to that, it's expensive once again, and it might not be where you need the Piat, so that's just an issue. There's one in the tank tab that is even cheaper. Problem is the tank tab is small and expensive, so I get not taking it there, but I think you should absolutely take it in the Recon tab instead. Not taking any of these types of unit is always a really, really bad idea. Like, I would not do this. And then also just want to point this out, if this is adjusted for the matchup, this is fine, but otherwise you want to have proper AT from A phase onward. Once again, essential tools, you want to have them when you have them available, and there's definitely more of the 57 mils, so you should take one of these in A phase if this is a unadjusted build. On the other side, we have Lovas. So this is also a division that I do not think should be played balanced. I think you should aim for shorter incomes, more aggressive incomes like Vanguard or Maverick. The reason here is relatively simple. While you have an infantry tab that can last you for a while, but it lacks other tools. Like, it runs out relatively quickly. You have a great tank tab. Like, to run ones and to run twos are super strong. However, at some point you might probably need something with more punch, and this just isn't there. You have the Hetzer, and this is about it. And so, like, if you really want to go long, I think this really does not have the depth that you need in the tank tab, and the say broadness of tools that you want to have in order to really be able to survive later on. Now, earlier on the other hand, these relatively cheap but still very powerful tanks can put a lot of pressure on your opponent, right? You can spam these around. This, brings up a lot of pressure, and this makes this phenomenal for an aggressive income. You can also support it nicely with your strong infantry. This is usually very chunky infantry, which really is valuable. But after that point, it kind of falls short, right? You don't, as I said, you don't have anything to back this up afterwards. In the tank tab, your infantry, while great, cannot carry you through. And while you have some good tools in the artillery, it's just not really what you want to have for balance. The air tab is cheap, and like it's good units, but it's all not cheap. Sorry, it's some of them are, but it's there's no like particularly powerful high survivability plane in there, so you cannot just start air spamming your opponent either. Yeah, that's kind of how it is. You also lack essential tools here, like you don't really have that good AG support tools, and this is never a good thing when you don't have these. You don't want to go long if you're missing essential tools. What I want to specifically talk about here are two things, actually. Now, just the infantry tab to talk about. I would build this differently, but that's another story. I do want to talk about this. So, oftentimes you see people taking units in the Recon tab that I don't think are needed. First of all, if your infantry tab is good enough and this is not like a special unit that is particularly strong, there's no point in taking fighting units in the Recon tab, right? As long as your regular infantry tab is good and big enough, there's no need to do this. Now, as I said, if it's some special unit that can perform super well, I do get it, take it. In this case, though, you're paying 25 points for a single machine gun unit. Yes, it's chunky, but still, it's not really worth what you pay for it. And if you just need recon, why buy something for 25 points where you can buy something for 15 points? And you can even double vet this, and you still get 3. This is the nice thing about the Hungarian ones. You get 5 per default instead of 4 that you usually get. So yeah, just take that. And that's something that you often would do differently. Actually, one more thing. Having all your AT in A phase is a horrible idea if you want to go long, right? You want to have something in B at least so that you can last a little bit longer because you're not going to need all of this anyway. Reduce veterancy here, you get 1 more, and then take this in B phase, and that should do the job. The big thing here though is the add tab. I just want to talk about this because I think this is not a good idea. So these 2 units basically have the same purpose, and there's no point because of what that purpose is. There's no point in having both of them. Both of these type of units, Ju-87s and these Recon bombers, are very good because they are relatively cheap and they can force your opponent to buy AA. That usually, or a fighter, that usually costs more than this plane. And if it doesn't, you can just use it again and again and again and get value out of it, right? They still do kill things. Now, if this kills a pack 40, for example, it almost paid itself off, and then your opponent has to buy A and or a fighter on top of this, and he's already spent more than you did, like in total. So these basically enforce positive trades. It's like there's nothing that your opponent can do against that. You're forcing him to trade badly or invest badly because, of course, he has to invest more than you. And even if there's one area covered by AA, you can, use it in other places as well. So you can force your opponent to buy even more AA, actually. The problem is if you invest into all these tools, the total summed up price of these might be close to what your opponent has invested into dealing with this problem. So now you're actually not forcing positive trades. This is kind of the issue here. And then especially since he brings the cluster planes, I have to assume that his plan is to actually use them, that he thinks he needs them. And this is really bad. Like if you plan to use this is a good thing if you don't plan to use your Air Force afterwards. However, if you plan to, use your Air Force a lot, then you of course don't want to force your opponent to buy AA or planes early on. This is a bad idea. Now you can then of course start killing off the AA and all that. So it's not like that's not the issue here. But the point is, if you want to lean heavily into your Air Force, you don't want to do these kind of things. Now, for example, if he wanted to use his Air Force a lot and take one of these because they have very good resilience, they fly high and relatively fast, then that's another story. This thing might get through. But if you want to lose like low resilience planes, not the smart idea, right? If you use something like this, it might still be okay, but not if this is what you want to be using afterwards. Just keep that in mind. Okay, so we are here now. We are, as always, going to look at deployment because I do think this is relevant. So if we start here, like first of all, we can look where they deploy, and we can see that it's relatively even split. Of course, it's stronger in the center, but it's kind of common. But if you consider where things are going, it's not that much focus on the center actually. The south is definitely a bit weaker than the north. Now, this is not something bad per se. You can deploy evenly. You can deploy very heavily in one area, depending on how you plan to do the game. What I specifically want to talk about is this. So you can definitely grab this flag from red side. However, it needs to be done with something that is in a fast transport, which this one is not. Also, AT guns. AT guns should always be behind your front line when you deploy them. You don't want to have them at the front line. In some cases, it is possible to deploy them where the front line is at the start, but usually you want to have them a little bit further back. Now, in a situation like this, it's okay to want to cover this off as soon as possible. However, you need to clear it out first with infantry. You need to take it, and then you can cover it off. If you really want, then I wouldn't necessarily recommend this. If you really want, what you can do, of course, is have it like here, then drive it like somewhere like here, and then once you take this, you can move it in and unload it. That's something that you could do. However, I think it's okay to just buy it with the first tick of income then, honestly. Blue does respond here with a little push with this AT rifle motorbike, and otherwise relatively defensive. And this is a little bit further forward, but it's not super aggressive. He tries to go a little bit aggressive into here. Red side counters with just something back here. You can actually go here, that's fine. And then two support weapons here, which is redundant. Yeah, we always have to keep this in mind. You don't want to deploy things that are not necessary in, at least not if, I mean, having, basically redundancy is not bad because then if something dies, you're not screwed up. But if there's other tools that could benefit you more, it's definitely something to consider. And then if you go to the town, blue side pushes relatively heavily here. However, what you need to keep in mind here is that first of all, there's only one AT gun. So if the tank, like Sherman, actually is like somewhere around here, and the AT gun covers the road, especially since the 40 mil, which can't kill Shermans at a long distance, you kind of screwed with blue side. So I would like always when you make a push, you should try to reinforce that with armor. A pure infantry push is usually not a good idea. On the other side here, we see relatively aggressive deployment as well. Now up north, there's a relatively defensive deployment here and another one here. Now something that we see here is two units going here. And one thing that you always have to keep in mind is when you deploy is where is your opponent actually realistically going to push. And this is usually going to happen where there's a road. So this is not a place where you'd likely push. Also, you push somewhere where there's a flag for you to get. Now, right here, there's no flag for you. Now, you kind of get across the open and push into this flag, but you can kind of cover that off with units that you have in the town, so you don't need to deploy something here. At later stages, sometimes you see people going on this side. Like, it's not that it doesn't happen, but you don't need to cover this off from the start. But yeah, let's start this. I'm not gonna cut in between here because the next thing is already happening, and this is this. So we have recon planes right at the start. Now, recon plane in general at the start is not a bad thing. It's actually good to have some air recon because then you know where your opponent is going strong, where he doesn't. Sometimes you intend to, you're not sure if you can push somewhere. You can send a recon plane forward, and if you see that there's a lot of resistance coming, you can change your orders and not push. Or if you see that there's basically nothing and you have deployed passively, you can try to deploy a little bit more actively. What I really want to talk about is this though, and this is the first thing that I'm going to focus about. And that thing is transport sniping with planes. There's many ways how you can use planes in, or not as many. There's some ways how you can use planes with your opening to hurt your opponent. And I don't want to tell you as much about how to do it properly as I want to talk to you about what you can do to counter this, to prevent this, or how you can recover once this happened to you. Because I do have to say, this is very, very cheesy. Personally, I do not like it, and my opinion of people who do this is not very high. But of course, the important thing here is that you don't need to care about what other people think of you doing this, right? It's a thing that is in game, it's a legitimate strategy, no matter whether we like it or not. And because of that, you have to be ready for this. You have to expect this to happen, and you have to know how to deal with it. One thing that I want to say first, though, is I would actually recommend you not to do this if you are a newer player. There's a objectively good reason that has nothing to do with me not liking this. And this reason is that if you do this very often, right, you're basically taking the easy way to win your opening engagements or to get ahead with your deployment. Now, I know it is tempting, right? I do want to make it very clear. I'm not trying to be on the high horse here. I've done this myself when I was a new player. I've seen that people sometimes do this, and I thought, oh, okay, there's a thing that we do. So let's just do this. It gives me a better chance, and I mean, it's a simple fix, right? So why not do it? And then I kind of realized that is not such a good thing to do. Now, one of the things, of course, that's a moral question. I think is super annoying. I hate it, so I decide not to do it because I don't want to do to others what I don't like them doing to myself. But the biggest issue here is, and this is also something that I realize, is you're not actually going to get better if you continue doing this, right? So if you really want to learn how to win your opening engagements with skills and how to improve your skills, this is not going to help because this doesn't need any skill. Let's be honest, this is not skill based, and you're just not going to improve all that much. Now, what do you do, for example, when you play a division that doesn't have these? If you tend to do, like, if you do this often, what do you do then? Or if your opponent counters it, or if you fail to kill the unit that really matters for your deployment to work out. So these are kind of problems that you might have, and because of that, I think it's very much worth it not to do this, or at least do it rarely, right? You can do it every now and then. That's not the biggest issue. Maybe you know that guy is a very good player. You've played against him multiple times. You've lost against him, so maybe you decide that then's the time to do it. But in general, I would try to avoid it in order for you to learn. And then when you're better and you really want to cheese, then you can do it. Also, if you're playing in tournament games, I want to say this because this guy has tried this in a tournament game against myself as well. If you do this in tournament games, this is a bad idea to do it often because people are going to know how to counter it because they expect you to do it. Now, of course, you can surprise people by not doing it then, but that only works so often, right? So, yeah, just keep that in mind. So, okay, but how can you counter this? Well, we first need to talk about the types of, say, plain start cheese that you can do. The first one is this: you have recon bombers. They can spot what's on the ground and then target it directly. And yeah, the second one is napalm planes. What these do is they basically, like, they can't see, right? So you have to target at the start of the game a point on the road where you think your opponent is going to be at the time the bomber arrives there, and it's going to lay down a some napalm there. Now, this can kill units, but it can also fail to kill units. What it almost always does, if you do it correctly, is it will prevent your opponent from moving in as fast as he'd like, because the flames stick around, right? So if your units move in there, they will unload. And the only way to avoid this is, of course, to drive around. So you're already delayed, right? So no, even if you know units died, you are delayed, which is part of why you do these kind of things, right? It's not just to kill units, it's also to delay your opponent and allow you to get into positions that you otherwise probably wouldn't get right away. And the last one is one that I hardly ever see, but I have seen it, which is why I want to mention it. This is the combination of a recon plane together with a fighter bomber. Usually you have two relatively fast planes, so you might not want to do this with like a 15 point slow recon plane, but I've seen people doing this as well. Now for the first two, these are matchup dependent, and that's the nice thing. You know, there's only a limited amount of divisions that can do this, and if you play in a tournament, you have to build your deck, um, you know, to fight that specific division anyway. It should adjust it to the matchup, so you should check what your opponent has anyway, and then you can just check for these kind of things. Same for napalm planes. Now, the napalm, yeah, so basically you can do this. Now, if you're in quick play and you don't know and you're really afraid that your opponent could do this, then you can also just check. Pull up the wiki real quick and check what if a unit like this is in your opponent's division. Yes, your opponent will have to wait a little bit longer for the deployment, but honestly, I think it's okay if this helps you learn a little bit. So this is the thing. And the last thing is so rare that you can't really expect it. It is a massive point investment, which is why it's hardly ever done. Just I have seen it and I wanted to mention it. This one is not all that much matchup dependent. Now it technically is, but most divisions have some sort of fighter bombers and recon planes, so you can't really predict if this could happen to you based on your matchup. So what are ways to counter this now? Let's start with the recon planes first. So these are usually low resilience and slow. So what you can do is if you buy A right from the start, you can unload it, and if you unload it in time, it should stop these planes. This is one option that you do have. It's not always guaranteed that it works. Like for example, in this case, the AA is relatively slow. It's a small caliber one, so it probably won't do much. And these units are fast, is why they are a little bit further forward. So the question is, by the time you realize that it's coming, if you unload and these are still driving, is it really going to stop it? It's not always guaranteed, but it is one thing that you can do. Another thing that you can do is buy planes to shoot them down, because once again, low resilience and slow, so you should be able to kill them, maybe even head on, before they actually reach your transports. The problem with this is though, if you buy a fighter and your opponent doesn't do this, then you are sitting on a probably around 100-point fighter. So it is 1/7 of your starting income, and it doesn't do anything at all, basically, and that's bad. How you can circumvent this to some extent is buying planes that can shoot these downs but are actually useful. Now, once again, this is not this. I don't say that this is a super good thing to do, because if you buy planes with your like starting income, that means that you're weaker on the ground. But if you're really worried about this, or you know that your opponent's going to do this because you know him, then this is something that you can do. Some recon planes are basically fighters. You will see a selection of these now on the screen, or you should see them. They usually have like a weaker loadout or less ammo, but as long as it's strong enough to shoot these down, that's fine. And in my opinion, having recon planes in the skies at the start is very, very useful. Anyway, so if you want to have recon anyway, you might as well buy these, and then you get the recon, and if these show up, you can also shoot them down. But you still, you still get what you want anyway from them if your opponent doesn't do this. The other thing that you can do is buy fighter bombers, because then at least you get some value out of them if your opponent's planes don't show up. So the same thing as for the recon, right? You can just find a good target then to bomb. And on the plus side, if these things do show up, you can shoot them down and then still bomb something. So then you actually, basically pull out the universe card there, and that's just fantastic. So that's one thing that you can do. Now, if you cannot or do not want to do any of these things, pretty much the only option that you have is spread out your transports as soon as you see this coming, because then what you can avoid is that everything gets unloaded or potentially even killed. You're still going to be delayed though, so you're not going to get around that. This is very unfortunate. It still sucks, but this is at least, this is the best thing that you can do in that situation, is just spread out and make sure that you cannot hit multiple transports at once. Now for the napalm plane one, there's not much you can do. These are usually fast, medium resilience, or even better planes. So you like head-on shooting them down with a fighter is just not gonna happen. And because they're so too fast for it, you're not gonna get on the tail in time anyway. So I wouldn't even bother with this. The AA might not stop them in time either. So in this case, all you can do is make sure that you're off the street if you see that the timing might actually be so that it might hit your transports. And of course, if it has bombed in front of your transports, have to move around. Yeah, because this is the only thing you can do. So that there's not much that you can do to counter this directly, unfortunately. And then for the last one, because it's hard to really expect this, I wouldn't even bother with trying to counter the recon plane fighter bomber cheese. Um, it's hard to do anyway because you need to head on shoot down the fighter bomber or the recon plane, and that might not actually happen. So don't even try, because once again, it happens rarely anyway, so it doesn't really matter all that much. What's important to know though is that in any of these cases, maybe except for these, if you just have one of these coming at you, this is not a big investment. But if you have two of these, if you have the napalm plane or if you have the fighter bomber and recon plane combination, your opponent will always have invested a decently significant part of his starting income into these planes, which means that he is weaker on the ground. So what he should do immediately afterwards is make sure that he can take advantage of this. Find out where he's weaker, try to push there, right? Use the fact that he has invested into the skies and has less units on the ground. Use this to your advantage. The last thing that you need to keep in mind, if you get delayed by this, you have to adjust your deployment. You cannot try to immediately get into the position that you might have gone into otherwise, especially if you have a lot of support weapons, right? Maybe you want to have set up some machine guns right here. I mean, it doesn't make sense in this scenario, but let's imagine it would make sense. Pushing into this village bit after it has fallen with machine guns is just not the way to go. In that scenario, you just have to accept that this is now gone for the time being. You have to set up with your support weapons so that you can support a push into it. You cannot try to get it back immediately. So just, relax, don't panic. Make sure that you know what you have available to you now and what is, what of the units that are available still arrive at the front line relatively soon, like what is not has not been unloaded, and then consider if you can actually still push into the flag, because sometimes you can, or if you cannot and have to set up defensively to support another push later on. And then think of what you need to do that. Don't just panic and call in more units that you might not actually end up needing. And yeah, make sure first that you also can spend the points on getting back in there first, because if somewhere else you are winning but you need to reinforce it, you should give that priority, because once again, that flag that you have just lost because of that cheese play, it is lost. You can later think of about getting it back. So what you're seeing now is basically what you should avoid, right? He's trying to move them in the position that he was bound to lose anyway. and he's most likely going to pay for it. So you need to adjust your plan. You need to make sure that you can set up to not then get in there later. Now, another thing that I do want to point out is this right here. So the Commandos is now moving in. These units have already loaded. It is slow. It's just continuously moving. And now it's going to be cut off. You have to pay attention. This is also one of the reasons why you don't want to do this with a slow unit, because of exactly this. You also have to be careful where you unload if you have slow transport, because of that transport that just went down there. So now this is cut off. Now, Terrorbilly could have both of these flags. Instead, he has none of them for now. I think he will get this one eventually, but the problem is still, right, you down one flag that you don't need to be down. Even if he grabs this one, it does make a difference. And now he has to invest into actually stabilize this. So if you go for an aggressive push here, or like in any flag that is a little bit further forward and harder for you to hold, you have to have something supporting it there. Yeah, you want to have something in defensive position that can just hold the line, maybe even support you pushing in there. But you don't want to just rush in there with one unit and have nothing else that holds the front line. This is never a good idea, and this is exactly what we see here. I just want to add to that the other issue with this is that you're basically letting your opponent know now that there's nothing there. So he can now decide to push himself there if he doesn't actually need reinforcements anywhere else. And if he already has more troops there, he now knows that it is really worth pushing because you are weak there, you have nothing there. Whereas if that front line would still be holding that flag, he might not have enough troops there to be sure that he will certainly get that, and he might not actually have planned pushing at all. But as long as the units are there, he might as well try it, right? So this is another issue that you have to keep in mind. Now, up north, there's another major mistake here that we can actually watch unfold now. So there's this one RDT left. The other units got transport bombed. And Terrorbilly decided to move it forward. Now, he has this flag because of this, right? There's one unit that's holding the line there. The thing is, you don't actually need to push at all, right? If you have one unit left here, for whatever reason, the last thing that you want to do is push with it, because if this is going to go down, which it will, what's going to happen is that this flag will now flip, of course, right? Because there's nothing here to hold it. The Stackhand won't do it. And then this flag might even flip as well. And in addition to this, now these two flags can easily be recovered, right? What's worse though, and this is something that you always have to keep in mind with these kind of engagement, it's not always just about losing the flag. In this case, it's also about losing the position in particular, because you have the edge of the forest here, and then you have open ground. So this is something that you can cover off with AT guns, with support weapons, things like that. So once Guy actually gets the AT here, he can set himself up here at the edge of the forest. He can put AT guns there if he wants to. He just needs to protect them maybe with AA or something like that, but that's okay. That's all doable. So machine guns would also do nice. And then Terrorbilly will really struggle to get back into there. Now he can, of course, then try to go through here, which is where the Parasalto is sitting now, without any reason for it to be there. But this just takes time. You have to invest, and it would not be necessary, right? In this situation right here, if I was Terrorbilly, or like, let's put it that point. Terrorbilly doesn't know what's here, right? So he doesn't know how strong Guy is. Now, if there's one single unit here and he knows for a fact that he will beat it with the RDT, and he knows for a fact it's only that one unit, then maybe you can move forward and take this out and grab the flag for free. But for now, right, you don't need to pressure your opponent if you don't have the tools to pressure him. And this is what's the case here. You're only going to hurt yourself. If you barely hold the flag and you don't have a strong hold there, the last thing that you want to do is be aggressive. You want to be defensive, make sure that you can just hold your ground. Like this is a TNT unit. You can put it right here, and then these units, because none of these are CQC units, will struggle if they move into range. This is how you should be playing this. And then you can now decide whether you want to hold this, right? This is not an important factor. It's okay to give up flags if that means that you get the resources from that to push into other flags. So Terrorbilly could accept that this flag might fall eventually, and he can just keep this Aditi here to make sure that he can keep it for as long as possible, because Guy doesn't know what Terrorbilly has here, right? So it's possible that he doesn't actually want to push because he thinks that there is a lot of CQC here that he cannot face. And he'd rather invest the points into other areas, as we can see right now. He's investing here, he's investing into a plane here. So I don't think he's planning on, or at least not for the time being, he's not pushing here. And for as long as is the case, Terabili can just keep this flag for free, basically, or for 30 points. And it's something that you have to keep in mind. As long as he doesn't reveal his units, Guy doesn't know, and he might decide that it's just not the place to push for him. But now that he reveals himself, Guy knows, okay, he's weak, so he can push. And of course, once this dies, he knows for sure that he can now push, because then the front line will flip. Now, you can, of course, decide to reinforce it as well. You don't need to leave it like that. This is on you to decide. But in any case, you either want to be fighting when you're forced to, so basically you want to sit back here and wait, and if your opponent pushes, then you fight, or you want to fight when you I think that you really have the advantage there. This is the time to fight. Now, right here in the center, we see something else that we talked about when we talked about the decks, right? So the plane will go down because there's a Spitfire in now. And Guy has decided that he needs a cluster plane to deal with the Sherman. So he's called in another plane. And at this point, right, the Spitfire actually pays itself off because it doesn't only kill. I mean, the AA did some part too, but I think the Spitfire did definitely helped a lot. So it didn't just kill the Recon plane here; it also kills now this what's it, Ju-87. So this is now more points worth than the Spitfire. Now, maybe if you count the unit that the Recon plane killed, you probably have invested as much as your opponent has now, so you're even in trades. That being said, you still have more planes, and Guy also has shown us in his air type that he wants to use more planes, so the Spitfire can actually continue to generate value. And so without any spoilers, if we look at the end game result, we will see that this Spitfire has killed 3 Ju-87. I think it's two are like one is this one, and then I think two are the regular ones. So that's like 270 points worth of planes. Whereas Terrapilli has invested into one Spitfire. It's like 110, 120. Now if you count that, the two Ju-87s, I think killed 2 units maybe. So then Red has invested what if it's both 30-point units, it has invested like 180 points. It's still up almost 100 points or down 100 points in investments that had to do with these planes. So this is a positive trade for Terrapilli, and this is the bad thing to do for Guy, especially if he wants to take more planes after that point. So right here, just wanted to show you this. We have 2 more planes, right? So this just adds to what we discussed. He now brings 2 more planes while there's a Spitfire. There's no AA on blue side, and basically if your opponent has fighters, one way to protect your planes is AA, because then the fighter cannot just easily get in and shoot these down. But there's no AA, so now basically what Terrapilli can do on the left is he can shoot down Guy's planes relatively easily, basically for free. And this is what I talked about, right? If you force your opponent to react, but then you try to still use your air force, that kind of backfires, right? So let's quickly look at the situation here. We are 5 minutes into the game, and there's already some things that we can talk about what both players can do from here now. So if you look at this, we see that red side is actually relatively strong down south. Now blue side is reinforcing here, which may or may not be a good idea. We're going to go to blue side afterwards, but red side should now very much try to actually secure these 2 flags, right? Now we know, of course, because we have guard vision, that blue is weak here, but red should know to some extent as well, because it has killed some units here. He has a position here. The front line here tells him there's nothing immediate in this forest, so he can actually set up here, and he can try to push into these flags, right? If you have all these forest parts, you should be able to grab these 2 flags. You can kind of secure them from there. Now what he really needs is some AT to cover this off. He unloaded it way back, unfortunately, now has to walk it forward, which really is not good. So that's one thing that red can do now. Now, then we have the hill situation. And I'm not necessarily saying what's the priorities here, but what red needs to do now is stabilize this, because the hill, once, as I said, once you lose it completely, it's really hard to get back onto it. Now this part here is basically lost. It's hard to get back, but at least he still has something here, so he should now reinforce and try to go from here, or like support with the Sherman here, and from this position that he's still holding, try to get back into these positions there. What you shouldn't do, which is what he's doing, is unload super aggressively, right? You want to make sure that you can support your push with your support weapons, and you want to go close to houses only when you know that nothing's there or when you know exactly what's there. Because if you unload right here, the flamethrower is going to kill whatever is here. Now, the flamethrower might die in return, but or it's not the flamethrower. This is basically the Sturm Pioneer equivalent. But this thing is 20 points. This thing right here is this 5, but the unit I think is 30 points. You don't want this to die to the 20-point unit, right? It's bad. So you want to make sure that you set up to support your push first, and then move in and make your opponent's unit reveal themselves to you. Last thing that red needs to do is, of course, stabilize this. So what I would do here is just make sure that you have something in here, that you have something here, like support tools and AT tools, just to make sure that your opponent cannot push across the open. Now, we've talked about this. It's hard to get back into it because you have to push across the open, but the same thing is true for your opponent. So this is basically a natural secondary line of defense that you have here that you should make use of. Now on blue side, you do want to reinforce this, which is what's happening, right? You want to put an AT gun there to make sure that you can cover this opening ground off. What I would really do on blue side, though, is not desperately trying to get back in here, because your opponent's just invested a little bit to get this. Now, we know that the setup here is not perfect, so it might actually be realistic to get this. But what I would try to focus on blue side is, right, this is where he can get a massive advantage early on if he wins here against red side decisively. So I would reinforce this now heavily and make sure that you get this, because then, like, once your opponent is off, you have to reinforce it a little bit, and then you can basically be sure that you're not going to lose these 2 flags. So there's 2 flags that you are going to keep. In addition to that, he has that one on top as well. So there's just no point to desperately try to fight over this now. This one is doable to regraph for blue anyway, because you can start going over these hills and then you can start clearing out things slowly. It's going to take some time, but that's okay. Not in a hurry with these incomes. I want to stop here for a second to talk about blind bombing. So blind bombing is something that you can do. You don't know where your opponent is, but especially if there's like towns with houses, it is relatively easy to predict, like sometimes even in forests, but it's not always easy. Now in this case, basically what you want to do is you look at the front line, you see where your next unit is on your side of the front line, then you mirror that, and then you know roughly where your opponent is. Now, as I said, in the forest, this can be a little bit more tricky because you might get things wrong and units might be moving sometimes. With houses, it's a little bit more easy because you have distinct differences here. Like this is relatively close to the front line, this isn't as close. Now, Guy terribly targets this, which, if you look, is probably too close. If you just look at the front lines, right, the distance here is much, much bigger than the distance here. So it's more realistic that it is in here. Could maybe be here too, but then the front line might be a little bit tilted. So when you do these kind of things, you have to, first of all, look closely. Now, don't get me wrong. In the heat of the moment, this is difficult to do. I've blind bombed at the wrong place plenty of times. It happens to everyone. Just want to explain, let you know the concept, right? I'm not judging terribly for this mistake. I've done this myself. But ideally, as you move your units forward, or this comes in, you want to keep looking to make sure that you're really spot on, and then correct if you realize that it is not going the right way. And they're back down south. Another thing that I do want to mention. So we see a Hetzer here. The Sherman, of course, will not be able to kill this. So down the Sherman goes. 20 mil is out of position. There's nothing here to hold this. This one is rather far forward, even though blue is already pushed in, right? So if you're getting pushed here, you need to go a little bit more defensive. You can actually turtle up here really, really nicely. It's not much you need to do to hold this. What you can do is like put an AT gun up here. That's the smart thing to then just have something here. Piat would also be great. The Hetzer cannot really move further in because the Piat can, like a Piat here could kill this off. Now, what I really want to talk about here is this. Like, he knows that the Hetzer is here. He is just, I have to assume, a little bit desperate probably and wants to stop what's pushing forward. And he calls in another Sherman, even though he already knows that the Sherman is not the tool to actually stop this, right? You have to keep calm, not panic by units, because this is not going to solve your problem. Right, what he needs here is something that can kill this. That would be a Hellcat, or not Hellcat, sorry, a Wolverine, or just an AT gun here, right? Then Hetzer can also push forward. Now, once again, by the way, plane goes down because, yeah, Guy brings another plane, even though he knows that the Spitfire's around, and now he is definitely trading poorly. Now, there's another blob of tanks here. And that's okay, but once again, I probably want to have some more infantry follow this up. And yeah, I mean, look at that. Now there comes AA, because now that Terribly is shooting down Guy's planes, Guy has realized that if he wants to protect his plane, he now needs AA after having already lost a few planes. That's of course bad, because now he's invested heavily into planes that he's losing, and he's investing into AA to protect his planes. Now the only issue here is that we are still in B phase, and Guy doesn't actually have AA himself, because now he needs the AA to force off his opponent's plane. But because he took them in C phase, they're not going to arrive in time. So that sucks. So up here, there's two things that I do want to talk about. One is a mistake by red side, which is calling these in. So you cannot just drive your units directly to an occupied area that your opponent is in and unload right in front there, because your infantry, like your units, might get killed in the transports or at least unloaded and take some damage. In addition to that, blue is in cover here, red will be out of cover when this happens, so red side's units will get suppressed and potentially killed off. So what you need to do if you want to attack such an area is you want to either, like, you can bomb these kind of things and then move in right after, or shoot some artillery on them, because then they're suppressed or at least almost dead, so that you still win the fights. That's one thing. The other thing that you should alternatively, or probably in addition to this do, is set up some support weapons. Like you could put support weapons here, or maybe a tank or something like that, and then you can start moving in. Now, blue side is also making a mistake here, because nothing here can actually really follow up on a push into here, right? He cannot really take it, but he still moves forward his tanks. Now, they're cheap and expandable, I do get that, but you don't really want to continue push with tanks here. On like unless you know that you can also support them, because otherwise they're just going to stand here in the open and eventually die, and they haven't actually achieved anything, so you might as well just shift them somewhere else. Another thing that we can see here is blind bombing going on once again. Now if you want to push, it is a reasonable idea, it's reasonable to suppress your opponent's units there. However, you have to have some understanding of where they are, um, in order to do this, right? Because now, for example, the Maru walks in, these units reveal themselves, and now you could bomb them precisely and actually be able to move in. However, because he's used his blind bomb that he didn't do enough damage and suppression, these units are still alive. So they can now still try to stop whatever is coming here. So you need to have something that can provide the vision, and then you can bomb or shell whatever is there, and then you can move in. Another thing here is that since this thing has revealed itself, what the Sherman needs to do is move forward or back off. You either have to get out of line of sight of this, or you go close enough that your 50 cals can help, because then this thing is probably going to get suppressed. And here we see what I mentioned earlier, right? The unit is now getting shot at while in the transports. It will have to unload. Now it's in the open and takes more suppression. This is really not the way to go. Now what we're going to see next is not better. We do see this thing coming in, and this just supports my argument about AA, right? Because there's no actual AA here, which Terrapilly could have brought like 5 minutes ago, if he had brought them in B phase. This could be stopped now, but now this plane's going to get in, it's going to get to kill this unit, which is actually crucial to push in here, because the CQC unit that pushes through there. And what's going to happen next, I'm sure if we're going to show this, is next thing that's going to happen is a cluster plane's going to come in and kill off this Sherman, which is absolutely devastating, and it's just needless. There we go, there it comes. And we can just watch as this will kill off the Sherman. Now if Spitfire comes in, which it does, now we have the Nimrod here that can protect this. So now all of the sudden, even though he had in between invests a lot and he has lost planes unnecessarily, now Guy actually gets a lot of value from his Air Force once again, which should not be the case. Like at this point, at the very latest, this should be preventable, and it is not prevented. Okay, Sherman actually survives. Well, just wait for the next plane to come and then it will probably go down. Don't know if that happens, but it might. Now, another thing that you have to realize, if you shouldn't greed for this, right? the fighter is the only tool that you have at the moment to protect your planes, and flying into the AA is never a good idea. You have to back off as soon as you realize the AA is there, especially if you know that the opponent has really good AA. In that case, you need to back off. You need to accept that you're not gonna win there because now he's lost his plane. Now he is once again defenseless in the skies, and this is a major issue. And then one of the last things that I want to tell you is, so this tank blob here killed a Sherman, and terribly responded by buying a Wolverine. And this is not a good idea, okay? What you do not want to do, if your opponent is pushing you hard somewhere, what you cannot do is just invest uh, into single units at a time and send them in because if you send them in one by one, they will die one by one. This is just what's going to happen. If you're facing superior firepower, what you need to do is gather some forces first, and then you can put them in the way of whatever's coming for you. There's just no other way. You have to accept that you cannot fight this right now. You have to accept that this area is off limits. You have to gather some forces back here, and then when all of them are ready, this is when you can move in. Now, the game is going to end, but we can still talk about what both players could do here, right? Because, of course, one player is in a good spot, one is not, and I think it's important to talk about what both players could do at this point. So, one thing that Red can do is they can still, like, red shouldn't contest this flag anymore. Like, they can leave this unit here to cheeky grab this for now, but I would not actually try to push for this anymore because, once again, it's not super easy to hold, especially since he's lost this forest again. It's gonna get pushed hard here, so it's not super easy for red side to actually get a hold of all of this. So that's not the smartest thing to do. What red can realistically contest and continue to contest is this flag right here. And what red really needs to do now is reinforce this. Because this flag's about to go down, there's nothing here, so this flag will probably flip as well. And once Guy actually reinforces this, Terrorbilly is screwed because you're not going to get these two flags back. What you should stop doing is try to push for this, right? Because this is a hard place to push. He has no CQC now, and there's a forest, so he doesn't bring CQC units to reinforce it either. So there's just no point in doing this. And one thing that you have always to keep, that you should never forget, is there's no need for you to contest every flag that you've lost. It's okay to lose flags and not get them back, as long as you find flags somewhere else. This is the key point here. You don't necessarily need to regrab every flag that you've lost, or you don't need to do this right away. You can just accept that this is lost. You can reinforce here. You can pressure your opponent somewhere else, and then when you think things are going well, you can then start building up an attack force and then try to move into here. This is what you can do, but you don't want to just continuously try to regrab a flag desperately that you've lost. You can also accept that you've lost it and just leave it at that for now. That's never really a final thing, but you just have to think of other options that are on the map. Now, blue side is still doing something weird. He's pushing heavily here now, which I get because he lost his flag, but he has tools here as well. He can just shift some of them over. You don't want to, he actually can because there's no piats or anything here, but otherwise, with these tanks, you don't want to push for here. You don't want to push for here. You want to push for here. So the most reasonable thing you can do is support grabbing this flag and then support grabbing this flag. So you don't actually need all of these units because there's units here to do this already. At the same time, the hill here, while it will fall to blue relatively soon, blue's not actually super strong here, right? You do want to reinforce this. You do want to make sure that red cannot get back onto this hill because these are two flags that you are going to have then, and you're going to get to keep them. Like, they're not going to go back to red anytime soon. And once you have this secured, you can then still try to, invest further down south, but I don't think that right now this is the best choice to call more units in there because they're just not needed. And if you call in more units now, because you have the tanks, you need infantry to back it up, right? You need infantry to get into this forest. You might want to have more infantry than just these two units to hold this. You might want to have something up here. So this is something that you have to keep in mind on blue side. This part, reinforcing this here is definitely a smart choice, but I would definitely start reinforcing this now. This is what I would recommend. And shortly after that, Tower Billy surrenders, so we are gonna stop it here. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was helpful as well. I would be very happy to get some feedback. So if you're a new player and you think that this was really helpful, please do let me know. If you're a new player and you think it wasn't helpful, also let me know. Also, if you're a veteran player, I guess it wasn't that helpful for you because you probably know all these things. But if you have an opinion on this video or this video format and channel, do let me know. I'm always happy to hear it. Also, especially important, I think, if you are a veteran player, especially if you're one of the top players, share your opinions on the things we discussed in this video, because you might have a different opinion. And especially if you're a more experienced player than I am, of course, I think there's a lot that everyone can benefit from hearing your take on this if you do not agree with something that I said. So that would, of course, be very much appreciated. And for everyone else, I can just recommend you also checking out the comment section because, as I said, there might be something interesting and relevant there as well. Also, do let me know if you like the format as it is now, or if you'd rather have me like where we actually take single out moments and talk about these, or if you rather want me to cast the whole game without cutting anything out in between. I would still, press pause and talk about things in more detail, but I wouldn't it would still be basically one cast where you go from start to finish. Whereas here we just had we go to that moment to then to this moment, so on. But yeah, thank you all for watching. Hope you have a great day and see you next time.